Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2894 under Committee Report number 200. This is the bill pertaining to the proposed basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, we are still in the period of interpellations. I thus move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Marcos.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And I also move, Mr. President, that we recognize the Minority Floor Leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile, to interpellate.
Senator Juan Ponce Enrile is recognized. Senator Bongbong Marcos, Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr., principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized, and to avail of the period of interpellation, the Minority Leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, before I start my interpellation, Mr. President, I would like to make it of record that I commend the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Local Governments for having crafted a substitute bill to what was supposedly a very controversial bill that was originally filed here. But nonetheless, I would like to ask some questions on this bill in order to clarify and perhaps improve on some of the text of the measure as proposed by the committee to the chairman. And so I will start, Mr. President. Article 1, Name and Purpose. Section 1, short title. This law shall be known and cited as the basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And then Section 2 says name. The name of the political subdivision under this basic law shall be the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Now my question is, what's the word Bangsa? Is this a Magindanaoan term, a Maranao term, or a Tausug term?
I believe, Mr. President, the root word is a Malay word, which we have adopted, which is part of the Tagalog dialect and now the Filipino dialect as Bansa. And it refers to nation or country.
Yes, that's why I asked, because I've traveled far and wide over a long period of time in Mindanao, and I have not heard this term, this word, among the Magindanaoans, the Yakans, the Molboks, the Iranons, the Maranaos, the Tausugs, and the Samals. So, and why are we using a Malay word here, Mr. President? Who proposed this? Was this a proposal of the national government, or was it proposed by others? I'm just asking these preliminary questions because I know that Malaysia is somewhat involved in the crafting of this supposed Bangsamoro autonomous or basic law. So,
it is my understanding, Mr. President, that the terminology of Bangsa, the use of the word Bangsa and the use of the word Bangsamoro was a proposal made by the MILF, from the MILF panel to the government of the Philippines panel during the negotiations, which resulted in the framework agreement and finally the original version of the Bangsamoro Basic Law. The word Bangsamoro has never been used before, for the simple reason that there has never been a Bangsamoro in the history of the Republic of the Philippines. It has never been a Bangsamoro in the history of Islamic communities in the Philippines. And the reason for that is that there has never been a unifying political, tribal, traditional aggregation of all the Islamic communities in the Philippines. It has never been formed into one homogeneous group, and that is why there was no need for such a terminology, and that is why the terminology is something that is new, and was originally proposed, as I mentioned, by the MILF peace negotiators.
So the word Bangsa is not a Filipino term, but a Malay term. Am I correct, Your Honor?
I believe that the word Bangsa and the Bansa and all the related terms is a Malay is of Malay is a Malay term for nation, or it is a term for again a political or maybe a tribal, again homogeneous aggregation of several tribes. The implication is that there are several tribes within a bangsa, a nation.
Is it equal to the term Bansa?
I
in
believe so.
Tagalog?
I believe so,
Is
Mr.
it
President.
equal to the term tuna, iroy na tuna in Waray?
I think that it has a larger. The bangsa has a larger coverage.
Is it equal to the term Pagilian?
Pagilian, no, again, I think Pagilian refers to a smaller community rather than Bansa.
Ili, Pagilian.
I think, well, because the root word of Pagilian is Ili, so it is just, Ili is town, and perhaps that is why it is used in reference to a smaller constituency or subdivision.
Just to complete, Mr. President, may I know if we know what is the term used by the Maguindanaoans for nation?
The Mindanaoans,
What is the term used by Maguindanaoans? I am afraid I am not familiar with the term that they use. I assume that it is bangsa.
What is, how about the Maranaos? How do they call a nation in Maranao?
Again, Mr. President, I am not. I do not speak the dialect. I will find out for the information of the body and the good gentleman.
And maybe I would press further. How about the Tausugs? How would they call nation in their dialect?
there is a tausog in the audience. Maybe the sponsor can consult.
Sasud.
I am reliably informed by Tausug that the term is Bangsasug.
Bagsasug.
That is the Tausug, in the Tausug dialect.
At least one of the tribes has used this term. How about the Yakans, if I may know?
I'm afraid I cannot provide that information, Mr. President.
I suppose you do not know also about how the Samals would call a
Again,
nation.
I am afraid that I do not know what the Samals use for the term nation.
And as well as the Iranons.
Yes, Mr. President.
And least of all, the Molboks of Balabac. Well, anyway, to proceed. Who I have never heard of a Bangsamoro word. This is an invention.
I believe that is
Am I correct?
There have been in the historical record there have been mentions of the Bangsamoro, but in a very different context, and it is just to describe again Islamic communities, but not as a political subdivision, merely as a gathering or a collection of communities. But again, the reason I believe that we have never heard of Bangsamoro, because what we it is a word that was created that now includes a Malay term and a Spanish term, and that is why it is, I believe, specific to the Philippines because of the Spanish colonization of the Philippines and the use of the word Moro when referring to Islamic communities. This derives from their use of the word Moro when Islam came to the Iberian Peninsula. That is when they were the dark-skinned people of the Islamic communities that took over, at least the southern part of the southern peninsula, were referred to as Moros or Moors. That is why, because of their darker skin, hence Moors. And then when the Spanish came to the Philippines, they made the same application. They applied the term Moro to the same to the Islamic communities as well. I suppose consistent with their experience. But the term Bangsa and Moro together has never been used formally, simply because there has never been a political or tribal historical subdivision that can be referred to as a Moro nation or Muslim nation. So we have never had to coin such a word before.
And now it turns out that the term Moro is not a Malay word.
I do not believe so, Mr. President.
And
I think
it's not also a word indigenous to Mindanao.
I do not think so, Mr. President. As I said, I understand it is the Spanish word for Moor.
No, that's why I make these preliminary questions, because I have a purpose to raise later on, Mr. President. And I was told that the Muslims of our country abhorred to being called Moros.
That is right, Mr. President.
They consider this very insulting word to be used against them. And if we say they are Moros, they would probably react, and they might use their Chris to for a purpose.
That is absolutely right, Mr. President. In fact, during the hearings that we had, there were several instances where some tribes other than the Magindanaoans were questioning the use of the word Moros. And one particular example, a gentleman testifying in the hearing said that when they were, he's presently now a government official in Sulu, and he says that when he was in school and somebody would call him, when his school here in Manila, and somebody would call him a Moro, he would fight them. Because as far as he was concerned, the term Moro was a demeaning one, and not one that he found acceptable. It was with some surprise, Mr. President, that the MILF chose to adopt the word Moro, because even in Spanish literature, Moro is immediately defined as something akin, something similar to barbarian, and that is why, or outsider, or so that is why it has over the years been accepted that this is not a complimentary term to be used for any person of the Islamic faith. However, that is why, as I said, it was with some surprise that when we received when the negotiations were ongoing, the terminology that was being used was for a Bangsamoro and we would have expected that they would have disposed of it, but nevertheless, somehow MILF decided that it was time to make it official and refer to themselves as Moro.
Anyway, am I correct then in my impression that when the proponents of the BBL, the original bill proposed by the Executive Department of the government to Congress, used the term Bangsamoro, that the pejorative connotation of the word Moro no longer resentful to the Muslim population of the country?
Well, I would assume so, Mr. President, because it is they who had proposed it. Although, as I said, there still remain a number within the Muslim community who do not accept it as a complimentary term and would prefer not to be referred to as Moro.
But that is only an assumption. Has there been an actual verification whether the people that will be covered by this law will not resent the use of the term Bangsamoro?
It is not an assumption, Mr. President. The objection has been raised by many who had come to our hearings, in the hearings for this measure, who expressed again who expressed their objection to being referred to as Moro. The pejorative, as the gentleman uses, the pejorative aspect of it still remains within many people. It is a word that was used as an insult when they were younger, and I suppose that is why they, to this day, prefer to be referred to as part of the Muslim community or part of their tribe, as Tausugs, as Maguindanawans, as Maranaos, and not as Moros.
Now, both of us know that our Constitution never used this term. It uses something else. And to me, this is quite significant because we are changing the term used by the Constitution. So I will come to that afterwards in the course of my interpellation, Mr. President, because I remember that I think Section 15 to 21 of Article 10 of the Constitution speaks of Muslim Mindanao.
That is right, Mr. President. It speaks of the an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and also in Cordillera. But as reference to today's discussion, yes, the only term we hear is to create an autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. That is the only term that we have.
That is the mandate to us.
That is the mandate that the Constitution imposes upon imposed upon the first Congress after its creation.
Yes. Now, just for the sake of clarity, what are the territorial and political subdivisions of the Republic of the Philippines as provided in the Constitution?
I think as defined in the Constitution, it is within the bounds as agreed in the Paris Treaty between the Americans and the Spanish. So now there are some as to the discussions because of what is happening in the West Philippine Sea.
The political subdivisions are stated in the Constitution. There are provinces.
Oh, I'm sorry. The political subdivisions
Yes.
are very simply the provinces, the cities, the municipalities, and the barangays. But there will be an autonomous region of the Muslim Mindanao.
That is a special provision of the Constitution.
Yes, Mr. President, that is so.
In a specific article of the Constitution. Now, Your Honor, if, and of course, being a specific mandate in the Constitution, it is placed under the general subject of local government. Am I correct?
That is right. Article 10 is entitled Local Government.
So we cannot go beyond creating a local government.
Well, the autonomous regions are still regarded as a local government.
Correct. Yeah.
Both, well, the at least that one with that which was eventually created, the Cordillera Autonomous Region, did not gain the approval during the plebiscite. So we are only dealing now with the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, which, again, because it is still considered an autonomous government, and that is one of the reasons why we have had to define very, very clearly what exactly this new form of government. It is, I say new, because it is still different from the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region is now going to be a different kind of autonomous region with certainly very different powers and possibly also different boundaries. And so it is an entirely new political subdivision, and that is what I think we are hoping or seeking to define, is what exactly it means. What exactly autonomy means in terms of the context of Muslim Mindanao.
In other words, the Constitution delegated to Congress the power to create an autonomous region in a particular place in Mindanao and in the Cordilleras. And that this autonomous region, whatever it is simply a local government under the Republic of the Philippines, a political subdivision of the Republic of the Philippines.
I believe that is very clearly stated in Section 1 of Article 10, that it is one, albeit unique, kind of local government, but nevertheless a local government.
And it cannot go beyond being a local government.
Certainly not, and that is one of the problems that we had encountered, in that they had given themselves, or at least the law that was first proposed had given powers that clearly belong only to the national government.
So my question is, if that is so, why do we have to emphasize and spell out in this proposed law that the Bangsa Autonomous Region is a political subdivision when that political status is already spelled out in the Constitution?
That is, I think,
to emphasize.
We wanted to be very, very clear in writing the substitute bill, to be very, very clear that some of the observations, the objections, the concerns that had been raised, that they had taken on many of the attributes of a national government, and therefore that this was perhaps a first step to separation. That kind of assurance we felt was necessary, and that is why it is expressly stated that the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region is a political subdivision, under the national government. I think the gentleman will find, Mr. President, that there are many instances in the substitute bill that I have filed wherein we expressly state certain aspects of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and its government and its powers. We expressly state those so as to make it, again, although it is already made clear in the Constitution, but again, to make it very clear to all observers and to all commentators and and perhaps even some of the critics, that this is not a state within a state. It is perhaps the closest we can come to it is a sub-state, but an autonomous region within the national government, within the Republic of the Philippines.
Now, Mr. President, Section 15 to 21 of the Article 10 of the Constitution are delegated powers. The Filipino people, being the source of powers of government, all government emanates from the consent of the governed, delegated to us the power to create an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and the Cordilleras. My question is Congress authorized to expand, reduce, change, or replace the delegated powers to Congress by the sovereign people, like changing the name of the political entity mentioned in Section 15 to 21 and of Article 10 of the Constitution? Can we really do that without violating the Constitution?
I believe by an act of Congress, such as changing the names and even some of the boundaries of political subdivisions can be changed by Congress, and we do that regularly by creating provinces. We do that by creating new congressional districts. Changing of the name is something that happens, is fairly commonplace, and I think it is well recognized that it is within the powers of Congress to do so.
In fact, Congress has exercised that power as mandated by the Constitution to create an autonomous region, and it names it as exactly as provided in the Constitution, Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, because that is the mandate of the people. And so therefore, I assume that the understanding of Congress and its interpretation of that mandate of the people is that we must always call this place as an autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao and not a Bangsamoro autonomous region, because as we go along in this interpellation, I will show that we are expanding the limitations of the terms used in sections 15 to 21 of Article 10 of the Constitution by accepting the term Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
Certainly, Mr. President, the term Bangsamoro or the term Bangsamoro Autonomous Region does not appear anywhere within Article 10, sections 15 to 21. Merely what we have are the reference to the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao.
Now, just to clarify, Section 2, line 3. Section 2, line 3 of page 2. Of the bill, of this bill. SB number 2894 uses the phrase, this law and other related laws. What are these related laws mentioned here?
and it refers to nation or country.
Yes, that's why I asked, because I've traveled far and wide over a long period of time in Mindanao, and I have not heard this term, this word, among the Magindanaoans, the Yakans, the Molboks, the Iranons, the Maranaos, the Tausugs, and the Samars. So, and why are we using a Malay word here, Mr. President? Who proposed this? Was this a proposal of the national government, or was it proposed by others?
Senator Bongbong Marcos, Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr., principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized, and to avail of the period of interpellation, the minority leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, before I start my interpellation, Mr. President, I would like to make it of record that I commend the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Local Governments for having crafted a substitute bill to what was supposedly a very controversial bill that was originally filed here. But nonetheless, I would like to ask some questions on this bill in order to clarify and perhaps improve on some of the text of the measure as proposed by the committee to the chairman. And so I will start, Mr. President. Article 1, Name and Purpose. Section 1, short title. This law shall be known and cited as the basic law for the Bangsa.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2894 under Committee Report number 200. This is the bill pertaining to the proposed basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, we are still in the period of interpellations. I thus move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Marcos.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And I also move, Mr. President, that we recognize the minority floor leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile, to interpellate.
Senator Juan Ponce Enrile is recognized.
Moro Autonomous Region. And then Section 2 says name. The name of the political subdivision under this basic law shall be the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Now my question is, what's the word Bangsa? Is this a Magindanaoan term, a Maranao term, or a Tausug term?
I believe, Mr. President, the root word is a Malay word, which we have adopted, which is part of the Tagalog dialect and now the Filipino dialect as bansa.